This video is going to be a quick analysis of how the combat system of Resident Evil 2 Remake helps support the core experience that Capcom offered with this amazing game. This core experience was essentially the same as the original game, and it was centered around survival horror aspects such as resource management, making the player feel very vulnerable, and having a very scary setting. However, since the original game and the remake offer completely different experiences gameplay-wise, for instance, the original game had static camera shots and tank controls, whereas the remake offers a more action-focused experience with a third-person camera. This meant that the design team had to be very careful in how to approach this idea of keeping the same core horror experience. First, let's talk about the shooting itself, which is the core element of the combat. It feels very balanced in the sense that when compared to previous Resident Evil titles, which were more action focused, here the shooting feels more like a tool at the player's disposal rather than a solution to every single encounter. For instance, instead of killing an enemy zombie, the player can simply choose to stun it by shooting it in the head or in the knees to make it fall over, and then proceed to run past it, saving resources in the process. Additionally, although the player can move while shooting, it greatly decreases their accuracy. Because of this, they are motivated to stand still while shooting, which in turn leaves them more vulnerable to enemy attacks. This balance makes the combat feel very strategic and intentional, perfect for this type of genre. Now, let's talk about the enemy design of this game. Resident Evil 2 Remake has a lot of enemies that make the player feel very small and vulnerable for two reasons. The first one is that they are very resilient in the sense that it does take quite a few resources to take them down, and second, because they are very deadly to the player. In fact, some enemies can even one-shot them. This in turn encourages players to approach each encounter in a very mindful manner, because it is not advisable to engage with every single enemy. Essentially, they'll have to decide which enemies are worth killing and which ones are better off simply ignoring them. For instance, the Licker enemy, that appears several times inside the game, is very fast and deadly, but cannot see the player, so they may simply choose to sneak past it instead of trying to kill it and risk taking damage. Alternatively, players can opt to take down enemies who patrol frequently traverse areas so that they can mitigate the risk of essentially taking damage every time they pass through that corridor. This decision making process keeps the player constantly on their toes and very engaged with the game. Another element that influences the combat is the crafting system. Essentially, players have access to different types of gunpowder that they can mix and match to create the specific ammo they desire and better match their needs and playstyles at the specific moment. For instance, they may choose to craft more handgun ammunition to deal with the frequently encountered zombies, or create shotgun ammo to deal with a future boss. This adds another layer of decision making and strategy to their playthrough. The level design of the game also has a direct influence on the combat. By mostly consisting of very tight corridors, the game creates a very claustrophobic atmosphere that makes the players feel very uneasy. Because of these narrow corridors, when encountering a zombie or enemy, players are forced to engage with it by either killing it or distracting them to slip through. Additionally, by using woodworks that are scattered around the level, the player can alter the environment by sealing windows that the zombies use to enter the building, which in turn limits the number of zombies that the player needs to encounter. However, players need to decide which windows to seal because the number of boards is limited. Finally, the weapons themselves force the player to make interesting choices. For instance, players can choose to upgrade their weapons at the cost of inventory space, so they need to decide if the extra firepower is worth losing an inventory space. Another example is the knives that the player finds in the game. They not only give the player an alternative attack to the guns, but they also let the player use it to escape the grasp of an enemy. However, this greatly deteriorates the weapon and it gets stuck on the enemy and can only be retrieved by killing it. This makes the player consider whether it's worth using the knife to escape or taking the hit, especially because knives are very useful but very scarce in the game. By combining all of these aspects, I think Capcom was very successful in creating a truly special remake that, although felt very modern, it also did not lose track of what made the original game very special. I truly think that they managed to modernize the survival horror game with this game and cannot wait to see what new games will they do in the future.